Good morning, all. It's really nice to be back in Newcastle. I spend a lot of my time in London, and it's nice to come to a city where you're not fleeced. I did a double take when I saw how much it was actually going to park the car this morning. It would have cost me that for an hour in London. And this is where we were born. So I have the great privilege of being the chief executive of Atom Bank, which is a local business. It was founded as a business, as an off-the-shelf company 3 years ago. And it was founded by myself and 5 other people, but the principal among them was a chap called Anthony Thompson. Is a chap called Anthony Thompson, and Anthony's a local. He's from Newcastle. And Anthony's an entrepreneur, in the truest sense of the word. Let me just ask you a question. Are there people in the audience who have started their own business? You just look at that. So these people who have put up their hands who have started their own business, I can do that too. These are people who want to pick a fight. You should be wary of people who tell you that they've started their own business. They start fights. Yeah? I don't think I'm quite that extreme, right? But I'm the guy who joins the fight early. Yeah? I won't stand on the sidelines. And so Anthony Thompson came to me nearly 4 years ago with I'm thinking of starting another bank, because he had already started a bank called Metro Bank. Would you be up for it? And at that time, I was the chief executive of a bank called First Direct, based in Leeds. And for reasons that I still can't really answer, I said I was, which is possibly the maddest and stupidest thing I ever did. Because here's the thing about starting a business, and you'll know this if you've done it. The best analogy or metaphor I can use to describe it is, it's like a roller coaster. That if you don't like roller coasters, and I don't like roller coasters, right, then there's a nervousness before you get on it, right? But you get on it, and the first thing that happens is they lock you in. And now you can't get off it, right? And it starts up, and it's initially not that scary. It's pretty slow, and it goes up and up and up, and you get higher and higher and higher. And there's that moment on a roller coaster, usually the really good ones, where you round a bend, and there's a blindness ahead of you. You can't quite see what happens next, but you know something bad is coming. And you maybe catch a glimpse of the fall, right? And it's an awfully long way down. And then the ride really begins. And you go down, you go up, you go roundabout, it goes all over the damn place. And you want to get off. Frequently, you want to get off. And then, curiously, there are times you think, this is actually quite cool. It's quite good fun to be on this roller coaster. But the really interesting thing is all the people you meet who say, what a wonderful time you must be having on that roller coaster. But they're not on the roller coaster. They're standing on the sideline thinking that's a great thing. So a little bit about Atom. Atom was founded here by people who put their hands in their pockets to the tune of £3.5 million at the start of 2014. Local people, entrepreneurs, successful business people from the city in the main. And they gave the money to 6 people without an office, without any of the sort of trappings of seriousness. 6 people who had done stuff in their lives, who had worked in technology and in banking, but essentially asking for quite substantial amounts of money to go build a business. Because a bank's not a business that you can run on a credit card for a while. It's just, unfortunately, quite an expensive thing to build. I mean, horrendously expensive to build. It's about 3 times more expensive than we thought it was going to be. But they gave us £3.5 million to go and build a business plan. And are we on fire? I don't think so. To go and build a business plan and to found a business on the proviso that it was in the Northeast. Because most banks are not. Let's be absolutely clear. Most banks are based in the City of London. Post-Brexit, some of them are going to be based in Dublin and Frankfurt, but we'll wait and see how that plays out. And why did they do it? They didn't do it because they were interested in digital businesses or they were interested in banking. A banker is actually a guy who gives you an umbrella when the sun is shining and takes it away when it starts to rain. Let's be really clear. People like me are not greatly loved and admired in society. They did it because they wanted to create prosperity here, in this region. Because it's harder to create a bank, I think, in the Northeast or outside of London than it is in London. Because the money's in London, and the regulators are in London, and that, some would have you believe that all the skill and all the technological nooses in London, which is just complete bottom, but there you go. So to do it here is just a tougher gig. So we started on a journey, and eventually we started to raise some quite serious amounts of money as we progressed to 2014 and 15. It took us 1 year to get a business plan and license application together, a whole year just to write a document. I mean, it was quite a document, but nonetheless. And then it is 2 years since we were a licensed bank, 1 year since we started to trade. And we expect by the end of June, because we've really only been dialing up the heat on the business in the last 4 months. I wouldn't like to tell you that we played at banking last year, but it was a completely new technology stack and a completely new team in 2016. And so we started to turn up the heat this year. We expect to get to the end of June with about £600 million in deposits and about £600 million in lending. And we lend to small businesses and to residential mortgage customers. It's important because people have been willing to trust us with their money. Who knew that they'd be prepared to do that? People have been willing to trust a bank that they can't see and never will see, and have been willing to use a piece of technology to do it. In an industry where change is driven by, frankly, two things. Change is driven by rules, because banks are rules-based institutions, right? They are quite extraordinary businesses, fascinating things. Trust me, you'll have to go with me on this, because they don't obey the laws of gravity or physics or chemistry. They are entirely constructs of rules, and if the regulators change the rules, banks have to change to follow them. So by far the biggest driver for change in banking, and I mean change for good in banking, has come from regulators in the UK and Europe. Because if you had left it to the banks to change themselves, they'd never done it, right? And they don't get the credit for it, which is annoying for them, and frankly, I think unfair. But the regulator drives the pace of change in banking much more so than anything else. The other driver for change are people like you and me, who change the way that they interact with businesses and services, and have been willing to do so at an increasing velocity over the last 10 years. And of course, we all know why, because 10 years ago, give or take, a radical sort of new development in technology began to gather momentum. And banks have had no choice. They've had no choice about whether they follow that star. They have to follow that star. But here's the thing, they're also very big and very evolved things, right? They've had 150 or 250 years to get good at what they're doing and to figure out how to make money. But that makes them slow, and it makes them cumbersome, and they are absolutely shambolic, and I mean shambolic, at managing obsolescence. In a technology industry, obsolescence is a constant threat to what you do in the future. You have to be brave enough to kill your darlings and to get rid of the past, because if you're not, then you damn well know you're going to drag it with you into the future. That is exactly what banks are. They underinvest in their technology, they underinvest in their distribution, and they do it because of inertia. Because a bank is an industry that serves everyone from 9 to 90. And let's be absolutely honest, not all the 90-year-olds want to change their behavior. And who's got the money? The 90-year-olds. So actually, the pace of change in banking has been driven by the broad church that banks serve. Most business startups do not try to serve all customers out of the box. Because if you tried to serve all customers out of the box, you'd end up building an enormous amount of complexity into your business model. And perhaps the most important thing about Atom for me is the business model itself. There is no great ingenuity in what we're doing in terms of concept. We didn't invent most of the technologies we use. We have harnessed them in our business, not as distribution channel, because a digital business is not a digitally distributed business. It's a digital business from end to end. And it's very difficult to create a bank in that state on day one. So ours will undoubtedly be a journey as we evolve from where we are today to where we can already see we need to be in 18 months' time or 24 months' time or 5 years' time, right? So when it comes to the business model and what we represent, at its heart, we believe that money is a commodity. It isn't our money. It's not our name that appears on the money. It is issued by the Bank of England and signed by the chief cashier. And that means that our money is no more valuable than your money or, frankly, anyone else's money. It is a valuable commodity, but Santander's money is no better than ours either. There is no bank in the world that can afford to give all of their depositors their money back if all of their depositors wanted their money back today. Because that's not how banking works. It's an inherently unstable business. You wouldn't go near a bank if you actually thought about the leverage ratio. There's something called leverage in banking. Most businesses really, really quite careful and really quite worried about the extent of their exposures and borrowing. Banks have to leverage in order to be successful, right? So if you take it that it's a valuable commodity, right, then one of the things that you should be doing is you should be trying to take all the cost out of making that commodity available to your customers that you possibly can. Because it's no better than gas, guys. Yeah? None of us can tell the difference between the gas that I get from my supplier, which is apparently Sainsbury's, and let's face it, it's not, they're just a broker, as opposed to British Gas. That being the case, it stands to reason for us that if a digital business allows you to take cost out of the manufacture of the product or service that you deliver to your customers, that's the right business to invest in. That doesn't mean that that business will be for everybody. It clearly will not. It does mean, however, that the people who choose you will be choosing you and not paying for obsolescence. They will not be dragging obsolescence behind them in the way that banks do. And so that's sort of, at the heart of what Atom is. It is a centralized, self-service, digitized business on a journey to become more digitized over the next 5 to 10 years. It's also quite a sizable business. So since we started, we've raised £235 million of capital, some of it from a big Spanish bank, most of it from UK investors. A lot of that capital is about rules, so you've got to keep it in reserve in case something bad happens. But getting on for over £100 million of it is money that we spend and have spent about 3/4 of it in this region. So we have invested, we have extracted getting on for £100 million from investors, and we've spent it in the Northeast. And nearly 4 years after we started this journey, by far the proudest thing for me as the leader of the business is that we did that. By far the proudest thing for me as the leader of the business is the fact that we now employ 300 people in Durham. We are both the largest and the smallest bank in Durham. And we chose Durham, not just because it's in the Northeast, but because there was great support to us from the council, and frankly, because it goes against the traffic flow. Which is cool, right? Trust me. If you try to get across the river in the morning, you'll know what I'm saying. So we're 300 people. I don't think we're ever going to be 3,000. Our business model doesn't require that we're 3,000. Our business model requires that we keep the number of people sitting in the center to a minimum. Getting on for over 1/3 of those people are in our technology and change function. And then another 1/3 of our people are in our what might be described as banking services functions, the stuff you have to do to run a bank in risk and compliance and finance. And then about 1/3 of our people are frontline customer facing. And the frontline customer facing people are few in number, but disproportionately important to our customers. Because I will tell you one thing about a business, whether it's digitized or otherwise, and about the technology that it's using, it will fail. It's not it may fail, or it could fail. It will definitely fail, and then it will fail again. And then when you think it can't possibly happen again, it will happen again, right? I've run banks before. I know that technology is highly complex, highly sophisticated, ergo, problems will arise. And when problems arise, you won't want to speak to a smartphone. It's not been my experience that satisfaction in a crisis can be obtained from a smartphone. I'm just saying. At that point, you're going to want to speak to a person, and that person, in my experience also, will be the difference between you establishing a positive impression of a company or not. So much and all as you think you can digitize, if you like, people out of your business, there is no business that I've seen yet, certainly no business that provides a service to a customer of any form that isn't inherently dependent upon people. And at the end of the day, for now at least, we believe that we have to have, must have, and should have people to serve customers in crisis. We don't want to build a telephone bank. I ran one of those, they're cool things. I don't want to build that. Very, very clear that we want to build a digital bank, and very, very clear that we want that digitization to flow through the entire business model. And the reason for this, coming back to this commoditized point, right, which is it's only money, and my money is no better than your money. One of the inspirations for me about Atom is the low-cost airlines, and specifically Ryanair. Ryanair discovered something really important about 20 years ago. Right? They discovered, it was a brilliant insight, that if you don't kill your customer, now you have to remember this, that the killing of the customer is never a good thing, right? Generally speaking, bad, unless you're an undertaker. But if you don't kill your customer, you would be surprised at how much compromise your customer is willing to accept to get from A to B. The customer who wants to fly from Gatwick to Lisbon is in fact prepared not to go to Lisbon. They're prepared to go near Lisbon. The customer who's prepared to do that is willing to fold their legs around their neck. Accept that the bathroom may be out of bounds and bring absolutely no change of clothes for a 4-day flying trip. I exaggerate to make a point, but it's a really important point, because when you look at that business, when it started, right, it's in a commoditized sector where there are big, hairy, scary monopolies that dominate the landing slots, that dominate the industry. How is it possible? How was it possible for a non-entity doing exactly the same thing as all the other businesses in the category to go from that to one of the most dominant airlines in the world? You could criticize it and say it's just a facsimile of Southwest, which is a great case study, and you should look it up if you get a chance. But here's the thing. They actually understood what customers valued, and they built a business model to serve an advantage. It's not been my experience, and I haven't got a huge amount of time, so I'll start to sort of wrap it up. It's not been my experience that many people get an opportunity to focus an entire business model on a single advantage, in the belief that that advantage will be the decisive advantage in their competition or in their competitor set. We think the decisive advantage in banking is cost. We think it's decisive because at the end of the day, we produce the equivalent of gas or petrol, and nobody cares about the smell or whose it is. It's fuel. Money is fuel. So if we build a business that is very focused and disciplined about costs, in the end, it will not be possible for a big bank to drag itself into the future fast enough to compete with us when we're mature. But here's the thing. In order to be that business, you have to start there, not end there. You have to start with that attitude, not grow to that business. And that's a very painful thing to do, because we're not as efficient as a big bank. We don't have the inertia, we don't have the customers, we don't have all of the advantages that they have. It will take us at least 3.5 years from now to get to the same capital advantage or capital efficiency that they have, and it'll take us another 18 months to get to the same liquidity efficiency, right? These are long-term investments that we're talking about. But there's no possible way, short of disposing of all their branches, replacing all of their technology, and divesting themselves of all of their complexity, that a bank, especially one of the big 5 banks in this country, can move fast enough to compete with a business that is much, much, much more ruthlessly focused on a single advantage. That means that we have to behave and price as though we were efficient now, which is deeply, deeply painful. But if you don't do that, you're essentially saying that you have the luxury of 3 or 4 years before you can compete. We don't hold to that model. And that's why digital is important to us. I am not a technologist per se. I have the great privilege of employing some hugely talented people in my business in that sphere. But I absolutely understand the decisive catalytic importance that it has to our ambition. We are entirely dependent upon using technology to create not a minor cost advantage versus an established bank, but certainly in the order of 70 to 80% more efficient than a standard bank. And here's the thing. You, the customer, pay for everything. In the end, you pay for everything. All costs get passed on to you. So, let me wrap up by saying two thoughts to conclude about the process of starting a business. First, we spent the last 3.5, 4 years doing what an ex-boss of mine described as something you shouldn't do, which is to bark at passing cars. And I love the line, right? It was a good piece of advice to me as a manager. I was working in the Middle East at the time. He said, don't bark at passing cars, Mark. And of course, what he was talking to was about noise, about what other people are doing, what competition is doing, what's happening outside the window. Now, you need to be connected to the world outside the window. Don't get me wrong. You don't pull the shutters down. But if you have a plan and you have a belief in that plan, you have to follow it and commit to it, irrespective of what happens outside it. Because I guarantee you, if you don't do that, you'll have bugger all. You will have absolutely nothing if you bark at the passing cars. I sincerely believe it. Second thing, which I can offer as a piece of advice, which is it's better to have a hole than an arsehole. The right people are the most decisive decision you can make. I get to lead a team, but it's the team. It's the team that drives the business. It takes time to get good people. But I guarantee you, if you get the wrong person, it will do damage to your business way beyond that role. It is better to have a hole than an arsehole. It's very wise advice. It's from one of the founders. It's from one of the founders of the Innocent Drinks Company, which is just a brilliant brand. And the third thing is about time as well. In the last 4 years, the world has changed beyond all recognition. As Herb said, to smile fondly at the thought of George W. Bush is an alarming idea. We were in Europe, we're not in Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The world has unbelievably changed, right? That will happen. This will happen. There's nothing you can do about it. Our biggest issue has always been capital, having enough money to do the next thing. And yet, we have always had more time than we thought we had. More time to make better decisions, more time to be more invested in the complexity and the detail. Yeah. The hardest thing to do, in my experience in Atom, is to decide when to make a decision, not to make a decision. Yeah. Some decisions shouldn't be made until later. And it may seem a little bit of an esoteric example or an esoteric idea, but I mean it absolutely sincerely. We have a way of making money and creating a stable business. It's a very traditional, very simple model. Go out and gather deposits, lend it to businesses, lend it to residential mortgages. The next phase of our investment is much, much, much more technologically focused. It's also much higher risk. It's vastly higher risk than what we've been doing over the last 3 years. And here's the thing. If you're going to take somebody's money, and anyone who started a business knows this, if you're going to take somebody else's money to start your business, you better have a bloody robust plan to make sure you can give it back to them at some point in the future. Because there aren't the same hideaways around the world that once was the case, wherein you can take refuge. And on that happy note, I leave you. Have a great conference.